and your T-cell's superpower knowledge of how to attack and kill COVID-19.
But Vax, don't you hurt?
It's no big thing. You may feel a little sting. Congratulations! You did it!
You've got superpowers. You are protected and you also protect your friends and family. If you come into contact with COVID-19, me and my friends will take care of it so you can enjoy the things you love.
We're bouncing back with the vaccine.
This message is brought to you by the Ministry of Health and supported by UNICEF.
This time check is brought to you by Massey Stores Home, your way to a beautiful home in the Gablewood Shopping Mall.
Another episode of Police Insight. I'm your host, Sergeant Zachary Hippolyte. Was missing in action for at least, I think, three nights. Yeah. I'd like to say good night to our Police Commissioner, Mr. Milton Daisy, our deputies, Mr. Wayne Shalry, Ms. Crisita Pelius, our ACPs, Mr. Nicholas, Mr. Thomas, Dr. Mashama Silly, good night to you. Mr. Ronald Phillip, all Gazette officers, inspectors, sergeants, corporals, constables, good night to you. Special police constables, special reserve officers, city police, former police officers, good night to you. Our brothers and sisters in law enforcement, Bodley Correctional Facility, St. Lucia Fire Service, Port Police, Customs, good night to you all. We are live on Choice Television, also streaming live on our Facebook page, Choice TV. Let me just get that page there right now, if I can. Okay, there it is. Let me just share it. Okay. So, folks, it's been a while. I just say good night to Victor C. Anthony, always logged in Brooklyn. Good night, my brother. I missed you guys. Tonight we have a very informative show. Very, very informative. We will be discussing the newly enacted Domestic Violence Act, also known as the DV Act 2022. And we will have a very important guest joining us a little later, albeit she'll be in cyberspace. She'll be joining us virtually. She will not be here physically in studio. And before we get to the commencement of this very informative interview, the usual shout outs. So, shout out to Auntie Ann of DBS TV. Good night, Auntie Ann. Mr. Victor Poyot, good night to you. Miss Juliana from Monsepa, Grenivier, good night to you. Mr. Sugar and Frances. Mr. and Mrs. recently, just last Sunday, I was privy to being invited to a birthday celebration of Mr. Sugar. I wish you long health, my brother, long life and better health. It was an amazing ceremony, and all those who were there most definitely could attest that Mr. Sugar enjoyed himself, and that he is a testimony of being thankful for family, thankful for a good wife, thankful for friends, thankful for long life. As you know, we have so many young individuals, young citizens from the teens, early 20s, 30s, 40s, who have, through deliberate actions and through non-deliberate actions, have lost their lives in St. Lucia. So good night to you again, Mr. Sugar, and good night to you, Frances. Happy belated birthday. Asgil, security officer from Grizzly, good night to you. Good night to the Louisiana family. Just earlier today, you guys put to rest, laid to rest, the matriarch of the family, and Anne-Marie Louisiana today. May she rest in peace. And I wish you guys all the best in terms of strength. Yeah? Kisha Leo of Moshi, you're celebrating your birthday tomorrow. I'd like to wish you advanced birthday greetings. Thank the Almighty for, well, lest forbid anything happened. Tomorrow when you wake up, my friend, thank the Almighty for the opportunity for seeing another birthday. I'd like to say good night to Claudia Monlouis. Claudia Monlouis of the Ministry of National Security, Home Affairs, National Security. She's the information officer in that ministry, and she's also, I look up to her. She's a role model to me, especially when it comes to media relations and public speaking. She taught me a lot when I was the press officer of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. So Claudia Monley, I'd like to say special good night to you. Those of you currently in the chat, Janey Joseph, good night to you, and also Val Shao. So this is why you tell a friend to tell a friend that Police Insight is on, and we will be discussing the Domestic Violence Act. Now, people, this is very important. This is very important, and I always tell individuals, this show might not be one of the shows that one would say is very high in the ratings, because this show does not promote, how would I say it in our little local panels, like, well, no, I'll not say it. I'll say it the best way. Controversy. It does not promote controversy. It promotes education. Education that is needed now, tomorrow, and as your life continues. Because the laws of the country is there, it's legislated, and we have to abide by it. And if we don't abide by the laws, we can get ourselves into trouble where we might be facing some form of charge, where we now have to answer to a magistrate or a judge. Yeah. So we were supposed to have our usual Know Your Laws. I'm not sure if it's ready yet. Is it ready, Collins? Okay, not ready as yet. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a very short break. Whilst we're taking that break, people, I want you to go on my Facebook page, share the live. It's important because when it comes to domestic violence, one of the offenses that is considered usually underreported or hugely underreported, and it can impact an individual, it can impact the family, it impacts, when I say impact negatively, the community and also the country at large. So we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll have our guests. Good.
Sometimes you know where you want to go, but may not know how to get there. Your vision, your future, your life. Bank of St. Lucia provided me the advice that supported my goals at every stage of my life, my business, my retirement, and what I leave for those most important to me. We may not all have the same goals, but we all need to plan for them.
To protect appliances from lightning, rain, and floodwater damage, unplug them, then turn off the main switch. Lightning can produce electrical surges which can damage equipment. Protect your electronics from water damage as well. Make sure you have flashlights, battery-powered radios, and extra fresh batteries available. Be smart, stay safe.
www.shopmassystoresSLU.com. It's Massy Stores online supermarket where you shop and pay for your groceries online. Try it today and save $10 off delivery until September 30th. It's simple and convenient. Choose delivery to your doorstep with quick delivery or collect curbside, which is absolutely free. Massy Stores online supermarket. Shop now.
Welcome back to Police Insight. Your host there, Sergeant Zachary Hippolyte. I also like to say good night to Angela Hippolyte. Angela Hippolyte in Salty Bus. I'd like to say good night to you, always logged into the show. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, joining us tonight from the virtual sphere, cyberspace, is none other than the director at the Gender Relations Department. Okay? Director Janey Joseph. Or is it Johnny? Sometimes I once heard someone say Johnny. I once heard someone say Janey. Miss Joseph. Madam Director, what is it exactly?
It's actually Janey. It's Jane with a Y. So you can't go wrong if you remember it like that. But quite a number of people say Jenny or Johnny or Johnny.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay, excellent. Jane with a Y. I'd like to say good night to you, ma'am, and thank you for joining, for agreeing to be my guest tonight on Police Insight.
Good night, Zachary, and good night, St. Lucia. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very much looking forward to talking to you.
Okay, excellent. Just for, I usually always ask my guests this question. Would you like to share a little bit about yourself, say something about yourself, whether professionally or personally? Doesn't have to be too long so that our viewers could know who they're listening to, what they're about to deal with.
Yeah, I am an educator and counselor in background. I'm a mother of a daughter, one girl, 11 years old, and I have been at the Department of Gender Affairs for the last 5 years.
Okay, excellent. And I just realized a while ago I said gender relations. I don't know why. It's actually gender affairs.
Because it was gender relations for a little bit. So.
Oh, I see. Excellent, excellent. So I'm not too off there. All right. So, Madam Director, thank you so much. So we're talking about domestic violence. My goodness, it's before I've been a police officer for 27 years, and I always used to remember that we never had a charge of domestic violence. What would happen is the police would normally be called to some form of disturbance between couples, individuals living with each other, and most times we would have to either issue a warning if that's what the complainant wants, or if charges were to be issued, It will mostly probably be if there's an assault, we charge for assault. If there is a wounding or whatever the case may be, fighting, that's what we charge for. But now we have this Domestic Violence Act. Madam Director, can you give us like a genesis history or background? Why do we have today a Domestic Violence Act?
The Domestic Violence Act is not new to St. Lucia. This new Domestic Violence Act follows through on a Domestic Violence Summary Proceedings Act of 1995 that responded to the need at the time to enact laws that would protect especially women at the time, because most of the complaints around that time with reference to violence in the home centered on intimate partner violence that was mostly perpetrated against women. Um, Over the years, what happened was that there were a number of the limitations with the act. There were few people that it covered because, like I said, it was concentrated a lot on violence that actually happened in the home. So there were certain types of relationships where violence of that nature occurred, and there was no possibility of recourse under the law. So it was difficult for people who did not live in the same dwelling but had difficulties, like that, where violence was present, to actually get the redress that they needed. And so in the early 2000s, not only in St. Lucia, but in the other OECS countries where these laws were present, those Domestic Violence Summary Proceedings Act, that were concentrated mostly on a particular form of violence occurring in particular types of relationships. These were, the cries of persons who were implementing those acts were heard. And so the OECS, through its Juvenile Justice Reform project, was able to develop some um, model laws. And Domestic Violence Act was one, well, Domestic Violence Bill was one such law. And so in St. Lucia now, we did some review. You would have known of the long history regarding the discussion around whether to actually amend the then existing law or just enact a new law altogether that was based on the model bill. And of course, in the end, a new law was actually enacted, and that particular law now responds more to the actual way that we see violence played out in domestic relationships. So it defined domestic violence more broadly. It covered a wider range of relationships that could get access to justice under that law. And there were a number of other aspects in terms of the actual acts associated with violence. The former law did not actually cover, and this one does that. So it is, you will hear a lot of comments about it being very progressive, responding more to the needs of St. Lucians. And of course, like you said at the very beginning, the police can see themselves more clearly and their role with reference to domestic violence in that act.
Excellent, excellent, Madam Director. So when we heard the term domestic violence, according to the Act, can you give us a definition?
Well, according to this new act, it says that domestic violence refers to any controlling or abusive behavior or conduct that harms, injures, or endangers the health, the safety, the life, the limb, or the well being of a person, whether that is physical
Mm-hmm.
or otherwise. Okay, and it goes into 17 different acts that would be identified as an act of domestic violence. So it is controlling behavior. It is behavior that is abusive. It is a
Mm-hmm.
behavior that causes harm, injury, you know, to the health, to the well-being of an individual. So there are a number of behaviors that fall into that particular definition. And so there are 17 different behaviors that are defined under the act. And um, it would interest many people that unlike many other laws that speak specifically to the the just the act, the threat of many of the acts that are identified in there are also considered acts of domestic violence. For instance, physical abuse or threats of physical abuse,
Mm-hmm.
right? um, where this new law goes into defining areas such as economic abuse,
Yes.
um, coercion, right? All of these were not described, were not defined in the former act. Um, Coercion, in particular, was not even in the model bill,
I can
right?
imagine.
For the ACS, right? But it is really the foundation of a lot of abusive behavior. So it needed to have been there, not only for for people to be able to get justice, of course, that too. But I think it serves as a very useful instrument in terms of um, public education and just general sensitization. So this is an area that for many um, types of well, for many places around the world where that type of legislation exists, coercion is one of the areas that the activists and so on lobby quite a bit to get
Wow.
into the act.
Yes, and folks, I actually have a copy of the act on my computer there. And if you'd permit me, Madam Director, if I actually go through all the behaviors that could be considered according to the act, acts of domestic violence. And like the director said, threats of physical abuse, people like just that, threats of threats of sexual abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, psychological abuse, coercion, we have coercion there, molestation, arbitrary deprivation of liberty. That's serious vibes there, Madam Director.
Absolutely.
Forced confinement, economic abuse, intimidation, harassment, stalking or cyber stalking. I like that. Damage to, destruction or deprivation of property, entry into the applicant's residence without consent, whether parties do not share the same residence. And if I were to just stick on that one a little bit before we take a break, Madam Director, I'm happy to see this one there because in my experience and a lot of other officers' experience, that's one behavior that the perpetrators used to use to intimidate. They would just go onto the property or enter the house, although they've not been living there for about 2 months, return when they want. Can you speak a little on that? Are you happy to see that type of behavior being featured there?
Absolutely. You see, remember the nature of domestic violence, this controlling behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
if we stick to those acts that are like the physical forms of violence, if we stick to that in the definition of the domestic violence, of the definition of domestic violence, you'll find that these are the foundational acts that are controlling in nature, that's intimidating in nature, right? They would not find their place in in the law. So people believe that they can get away with these things, but most times they precede the actual physical acts,
Ah,
right?
yes.
And I think that, like I indicated a little earlier on, quite apart from the justice that you can get, there's also the education, because when you recognize that these things are not considered to be appropriate things, ways of behavior that is considered to be good behavior as an individual, even if you're not considered to be a perpetrator of violence, just knowing that that is not appropriate behavior is helpful to you now in being able to control your behavior so as to reduce the likelihood of you becoming a perpetrator of actual violence, right? And I'm not suggesting, of course, that this is not an act of violence. It is an act of violence, but the lack of understanding of it as an act of violence previously had a lot to do with the fact that it was not actually defined in the law. So people believed that unless you hit them, unless you can show the scars, then that doesn't mean that you're violent against them. The other thing that this also brings to mind is that when you have all of that range of behaviors that fall under the definition of domestic violence, you recognize that anybody can be a perpetrator of violence, right?
So
And
true.
anybody can be a victim as well. There are certain acts of violence that are perpetrated against certain types of victims a little more often, right? And others that are a little more attributable to other groups of persons. And so we wanted to ensure that all of those acts that constitute violence, right, was included in the legislation so that nobody gets away with doing this.
Excellent, Director. Thank you so much for that. We are now going to take a break. Stay tuned to Choice TV and Police Insight.
At Courts Optical, we've got the perfect combination of style and value just for you. Shop from our wide range of stylish frames, and for a limited time, buy one and get a second pair at 80% off. We've got frames as low as $99. Ask about our affordable credit plans from 3 to 24 months. Make your appointment today at courtsoptical.com. Conditions apply. See in store for details. Courts Optical. Value you can see.
About security, knowing that you're safe and there's always light to guide your path. Lighting is knowing that you're always welcomed and that someone is waiting for you. Lighting is the friend who comforts and keeps you company in times of stress. Even when you're setting the mood or just upgrading the look of your business, lighting is there. Be the designer of your life and make the beauty of lighting part of your world today. For all your lighting needs and advice, come see us at J.H. Larcher's Electrics. Your effective connection.
As variants of COVID-19 continue to evolve, Lewis Industries Limited remains resolute in offering the best cleaning solutions recommended by EPA to reduce the spread of the virus. Our disinfectants, EnviroCare and Conquer Byram, which are highly recommended to sanitize, disinfect, and deep clean surroundings, will ensure you operate in a safe and healthy environment. With over 3 decades of experience in cleaning and consultancy services, we guarantee you trusted products and quality service. Call us at 450-4060. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website at www.lewisindustrieslimited.com.
Welcome back to Police Insight. Your host is right here, Sergeant Zachary Hippolyte, and in studio with me, well, let me take that back. Virtually, in studio with me virtually is the Director of Gender Affairs, Miss Janey Joseph, and you can never forget how to pronounce it. It's Jane with a Y. Janey Joseph. Okay, ma'am, let's continue our excellent discussion on domestic violence and the Domestic Violence Act. Who could be a victim? Earlier on, before the break, you spoke about a victim and how also when you look at the Domestic Violence Summaries Act back then didn't really capture a lot of behaviors and therefore limiting individuals who could have been a victim. Who can be a victim? And also, ma'am, I noticed the word applicant in the act, applicant. So I'm wondering, what's the difference between victim and applicant?
Right. So anybody can be a victim of domestic violence. Anybody. Because you heard the definition that I gave of it. Anybody can be a victim. In this act, children can also be perpetrators of violence.
Children.
All right. So children can be perpetrators. Children can also be arrested under the act. Well, of course, with specific instructions on how to handle them. That's a group of persons. But a victim and an applicant. So the act makes reference to an applicant as somebody who can apply for a protection order, right? That applicant does not necessarily have to be the victim. It could be the victim, and most times it would be. However, it could also be somebody acting on behalf of the victim, right? And so hence the use of the word applicant in the act. We know that many of the people who have come forward and are victims of domestic violence tend to be women, but children can be victims of domestic violence, and men can be victims of domestic violence as well. Older persons can be victims of domestic violence. Because when we look at the domestic relationships that are covered under the Act, there are so many different types of domestic relationships that you recognize that people can be related to each other through many different means for violence between them to be considered to be domestic violence, right? And I'm sure you can read from your electronic copy of the Act the various types of relationships that are covered on the domestic relationship. In the 1995 Summary Proceedings Act, the domestic relationship was confined to the home. In this particular act, people can have many different types of relationships that may or may not necessarily be living in the same domicile or same residence, and they could be victims, and of course perpetrators by extension of domestic violence.
Excellent, excellent. And I'm hoping I will go through the act. I hope I could get the different types of domestic. But there's one thing I know for sure, because I did do the training, folks. Some of us believe that visiting type relationships, and when we speak of visiting relationship, it means relations where the parties do not live together in the same household. However, there is some form of consensual, romantic, intimate, or sexual relations. Back then, some perpetrators would and you could correct me, that Madam Director, would believe that they could get away with it because she's not really my girlfriend, she's not my wife, we don't live together. We see each other from time to time for certain activities. What you're saying, Madam Director, that individual can be or is a victim?
Absolutely, because we have domestic relationships that cover people who live together, people who used to live together, people who share children or shared the parentage, well, shared parenting
Mm-hmm.
of a particular child, whether the child was actually theirs or they had adopted that child. People who um, are related by blood, but not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily living in the same household.
Mm-hmm.
And we have several of the categories, like, say, for instance, people who live together or lived together, people who were in
Interesting.
a relationship, who are in a relationship, or were in a relationship, right? So you realize how broad this is, because it really responds to how domestic violence is actually perpetrated, or how the examples that we have, because it's not just people who live together with each other. It sometimes occurs with people, and in fact it seems to be even more common among people who once lived together but now don't. So you have, like, for instance, the example that you gave, somebody may be living with their wives, have a girlfriend on the outside,
Mm-hmm.
but have some sort of because there's a romantic relationship between them. um, if there is violence between them, it can be considered domestic violence because of the nature of the relationship they share, even if they don't live in the same household.
Interesting. Very, very interesting and very, very important. The only thing I foresee, Madam Director, is that it will take some time for this to to be etched in our social consciousness, not just as citizens in terms of the citizenry, the normal person on the street, etc., but also law enforcement. What are there any plans in terms of education wise, in terms of putting the word out there, educating the masses as to their rights? Because I know there are lots of victims right now who have no idea that they are indeed victims of domestic violence. Are there any plans?
Absolutely. And again, I'm going to reiterate the value of this act for public education and sensitization. Um, there are a number of civil society organizations, and I mean, at the time of the passing of the act, you saw the level of support that the civil society organizations gave to the passage of the act.
Mm-hmm.
That there are many groups where they're already beginning to call for information with reference to the act. There are, I am aware of, some initiatives that are already ongoing in terms of the development of material that is specific to the lay persons, because
Nice.
legal language is
Mm-hmm.
not always the easiest thing to read. So we are in the process of developing a layperson's guide, a guide to magistrates as well. You know of the practitioner's guide that was created specifically for service providers, including police officers, and
Mm-hmm.
that would have been one of those that you would have received in the training.
Yes.
The language is made a little more, palatable for the general public. So we'll be creating these, and that would assist the the civil society organizations and groups, community groups, and so on, to bring it out into the community so that people will know exactly what this is. But even more importantly than well, knowing the law is very important. You will always remind me of that, right?
Yes.
But in addition to that, you also need to know how to live okay, because you see, we have a culture of dealing with conflicts in an aggressive, sometimes violent way, right? So when you have interpersonal challenges of that nature, because we don't live in little isolated spaces, um, it's going to come out into how we conduct ourselves in our domestic relationships, but it's also going to come out in the way that we conduct ourselves in our communities. So the knowledge of what is contained in the act and how the act defines violence and so on could help people recognize, that type of way of interacting with each other is not necessarily the most healthy way, and definitely can land you in trouble. So it allows and creates space for us to have the conversations now about how to be able to live in a way, and interact with each other, deal with conflicts, which is a natural part of life, in a way that is healthier, and instead of harming a relationship, actually grows it, right? So we will always have conflicts. There will always be situations where we're wanting the same thing, but all can't have it at the same time, or wanting different things. Um, and so that gives rise to certain forms of disagreement, sometimes disappointment, and so on. Knowing how to be able to express ourselves through um, those disappointments and those disagreements will assist us in being able to have more healthy relationships in the home, and of course that will extend to the community.
Excellent. Thank you so much, madam. We are going to take our, is that our second break or in our third? I'm losing, huh? Am I getting old, Collins? Okay. I'm tired, my brother. Yeah. I need some vacation. We're going to take our third break for tonight. Stay tuned to Police Inside.
Yo, do you see me? What about now? Get even closer. Hey, it's me, Tony the T-Cell, and millions of me live inside your body. It's our job to protect you against dangerous viruses that can make you sick. Guess what? We're bouncing back from COVID-19. So, you're starting to see friends and family like you used to, huh? Be back at school like you used to. And you're even enjoying the social life like you once did. But if you want to be powered up against COVID-19...
That's where I come in.
Hey, it's Vax, the COVID vaccine.
To help Tony and all the T-cells fight COVID is my mission. I carry with me fighter power when I enter your body. It gives Tony and your T-cells superpower knowledge of how to attack and kill COVID-19.
But Vax, don't you hurt?
It's no big thing. You may feel a little sting. Congratulations! You did it!
You've got superpowers. You are protected, and you also protect your friends and family. If you come into contact with COVID-19, me and my friends will take care of it so you can enjoy the things you love.
We're bouncing back with the vaccine.
This message is brought to you by the Ministry of Health and supported by UNICEF.
Vision Express Castries has moved to a bigger, better location with more services. Our new Vision Express location is on the corner of Bridge Street and Mikud Street. So come join us at our new location on Bridge Street. Best staff, best service, great vision. Vision Express. Call 457-7400 or visit us on Facebook.
Okay, welcome back to Police Insight. Your host here, Sergeant Zachary Hippolyte of the Royal Silentia Police Force. We're live on Choice Television, streaming live on the Choice TV Facebook page. In studio with me is none other the Director of Gender Affairs, Miss Janey Joseph, as we continue to have this very interesting and informative discussion on domestic violence and the new Domestic Violence Act. So let's continue, ma'am. What can a victim do when faced with any form of domestic violence, especially that of the physical abuse? Who can they report to?
The Domestic Violence Act makes reference to reporting to a police officer. That does not mean that you can't go to the other groups and agencies that you are interacting with on a usual basis. A child can access services at the school. You can access services from the the wellness center closest to you, the women support center, from the usual places that you access services. However, when we have to process a protection order, then of course the report has to be made to the police and the necessary processes take place before you actually get, well, let me put that in a way that is
Mm-hmm.
that's very clear, because that's an area that I've heard um, some grumblings about. So when when a protection order needs to be um, processed, a report is made to the police. The police takes the takes the report, and a statement is developed from the person who's actually making the report,
Mm-hmm.
and then that information is sent over to family court, and the matter is taken before the magistrate. You can receive an interim protection order depending on the nature of the act, or you may decide that you're accessing a particular service and not necessarily requesting the intervention of the police immediately,
Mm-hmm.
but you are always informed by the agencies that you report to, that you have the choice to do so immediately or to do so at any other point in time. But because of the new act now, the police, once a report is made, has to respond to every report that is made to them, right? So it isn't a situation where you will go to the police and then you're going to be told, oh, that's a private matter, we're not really getting involved and
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing, because right now the act empowers the police to act, and to act in a particular way, and that particular way includes responding to every matter that's actually brought to their attention with reference to domestic violence.
Okay, excellent. And I was about to follow up what is actually the role of the police when it comes to DV. But are there other aspects that the police must be minded of when it comes to investigating a domestic violence report?
So there are specific actions that the police ought to take
Mm-hmm.
when they receive a report for domestic violence. So what do you do? The police takes the information, and the specific information that the act indicates that the police has to actually to record.
Mm-hmm.
Then it sets out a set of actions that the police must take. For instance, visiting the residence, etc. It gives the police the powers of arrest. There is even the power of entry without a warrant in certain cases. And it also gives the information to the police as to what to do after that particular power is exercised. It also indicates what kind of information needs to be collected, and what is supposed to be done with the victim. So, for instance, we there is a list of thing. Well, it's how do you call this? It is the information to the victim. So the police
Okay.
reads that information to the victim. That
Yes.
information basically tells the victim what they need to know, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of what they can do, what their rights are, right? What they can do now, what they can do later,
Mm-hmm.
all of that. It ensures that the victim knows that there isn't any pressure to act in a particular way.
Ah, I
That it
see.
is because, again, remember that the police, just like all the other agencies that respond to domestic violence or any form of gender-based violence, for that matter, in St. Lucia, are acting in victim in survivor-centered ways, right? And so that particular set of rights that the police officer reads to the victim or tells the victim, because of course after a little while the police is going to know that offhand because they're going to be using that so often. Um, that the victim now is acting in an informed way, right? So they know that even if they do not take certain actions immediately, they can take those actions a little later, right? It also allows the officer to inform the victim of other services that they can access, because you do recognize that persons who may be victims of domestic violence, like many other forms of gender-based violence, require services from more than just the police. Okay, very often because of the psychological harm that victims of domestic violence and other forms of gender-based violence actually suffer, they require psychosocial support, sometimes mental health support as well. And so, in addition to that, sometimes they require medical services. So the police is also equipped with what we refer to as the gender-based referral pathway. And they, after they've done an intervention, maybe they've taken a statement and referred the client to the family court for the processing of a protection order and perhaps counseling services, they may also refer the client to another form of case management so that that client can be taken through the processes, they can be given the other services that they require or that they want at that particular point in time. But you know, overall, whether they're actually going to access it immediately or otherwise, the police should give them the information that they need so that when they in fact want to um, go down that route, they know exactly what they need to do. Um, so the police has a very critical role in addressing domestic violence now, and I think that if we have to go by the response to the training that was done, the initial batch of training to the police officers, I believe that we are well on our way to having a crop of persons in the Royal St. Lucia Police Force who are able to and willing, right, to change how they interact with the general public so as to be part of the solution to ending gender-based violence and domestic violence, at least domestic violence, but of course the general area of gender-based violence. But we do know, notwithstanding all of this, that we are people, right?
Yes.
We are people. So being people means that at any point in time, a person who serves as a police officer can end up being a victim of gender-based violence. A person who serves as a police officer can also end up being a perpetrator of domestic violence. In the same way, another service provider in the medical field, in the health sector, or in the social sector can one day um, end up acting in a way that a perpetrator does, right? And so, mindful of those things, I think that the message here is that nobody's above the law, right? But more than that, that we recognize that these are challenges that people, regardless of what their training or orientation is, these are challenges that anybody can find themselves involved in. And so we have to be vigilant, and we also have to be realistic in terms of the way in which we interact with people who are going through those situations, those challenges. And those of us who are in the field, whether it is that we're in the police force or any of the other sectors, we are looking out for our colleagues, because sometimes people believe that if you know about domestic violence, you're not likely to be a victim of it, and so on. Um, we did, we have seen, um, you know, surprising, well, not surprisingly, but sadly enough, We have seen cases where people who are very much engaged in um, even activism, um, sometimes
Imagine that.
engaged in the police force, are sometimes victims of domestic violence. And so this is something that we have to be open to, and we have to ensure a supportive type of attitude towards dealing with this problem. Because,
Ma-
like we said a little earlier
Mhm,
on,
mhm.
remember that if it's a cultural tendency, for people to behave in aggressive ways in interacting with each other, when there is a disagreement or misunderstanding, aggression can very quickly lead to violence.
Madam Director, there are um, leading to our appearance on the show tonight. You know, in promoting the show, had discussions with some individuals verbally, also on social media. There are those individuals in society who cannot understand um, why would a woman continue to stay. Well, we use women, we also know men, but the reality is the figures on the ground, what has been shown is that women mostly are the victims. So I'm going to use that example. Why would a woman know she's being hurt, physically abused, harassed, insulted in the community, is ashamed? They just don't understand why these women tend to stay in those relationships. In your experience, Madam Director, for those individuals who sometimes they would actually shun those women and say they're encouraging it, they like it themselves, don't mind them. What would you say to those individuals who are watching this show right now?
The very victim blaming that you know is perpetuated in the society is the very barrier that for women accessing assistance. Many women who find themselves, or just, are not only women, like you rightly said, anybody can be a victim of domestic violence, but let's use women. Women who find themselves in these situations sometimes have various different types of vulnerabilities. Maybe their support system has been destroyed by that same relationship, right? They don't necessarily have the financial resources that they need to be able to act in a way that is autonomous. In other words, to act for themselves, have the access to their own money and control over their own money, right? Um, and so these people sometimes have people around them who would have been part of their support system who are just flat tired of the fact that, oh, it's you again and you're coming back to me and what you expect me to do. I've asked you to leave the guy and that sort of thing. Who don't understand the nature of the relationship that has been formed over the years. When you're being controlled over a period of time, right? And you have lost that sense of autonomy, that sense to act with confidence in your own self. When you do not have a support system and you do not have any form of support on the outside of your structure, you believe that the agencies that supposed to be supporting you are not necessarily working in your best interest. When you don't have hope, you are not going to want to leave, because as far as you're concerned, that is your system of support, that is your system that is where you can perhaps find money to feed your children tomorrow, or a place to sleep when you're not being hit and so on. So, if you've ever found yourself in any problem at all, right? Any problem at all, forget domestic violence for a moment. Most times when we are inside the problem, we don't see our way out that easily, right? And so the same happens in the case of domestic violence.
True.
Within the setting, you don't see your way out, because the only reality that you are seeing is the reality that is around you at this present moment. And as far as you're concerned, that is your world, right? And then, of course, there are the emotional inroads that the perpetrator has already made into that individual's life. And so this person is connected to them in a way where they feel that they need them for their very survival.
I see.
So until that person gets to a place where they have enough psychic energy, strength, right, to be able to act, you know, unless they have been able to learn how to be able to act in a safe way, how to act safely, they are not necessarily going to just get up and go, right? So what is our attitude towards those people? It has to be an attitude of understanding that the reality of these people who are in such situations are not the reality of an individual like you who's thinking and acting independently and who's not in a situation of control and abuse, right? So first, when you recognize that, you have already removed the blame from the individual for not acting, because you've already recognized that we're not dealing with somebody who has the possibility of acting and just chooses on their own not to act, right? And so when that judgment is taken away from the situation, taken away from the equation, the individual in the situation feels like maybe that somebody might listen to them now, because you don't have that judgment over you. You might be in a position to listen to them if they access their services, from you, or they reach out to you. You could tell them of the services that are available, what you know. You can ask them to speak to somebody that you know, and give them a possibility of a hand, and even as I say this, I'm very mindful of the fact that there might be people who are in that very situation who are listening in to the show.
That's right.
And just to let you know that you're not alone. And we understand that the people who have been working in that particular area, they are not surprised by the fact that you feel as if you can't move. That's what they're dealing with all the time. You can reach out, you can still reach out, even if you reached out 10 years ago and every year thereafter, but you did not want to act. It doesn't matter. If you're ready now, come, right? You can call if, for instance, you're in a situation and it's intimate partner abuse, like the person that you're intimately involved in is a person who is being abusive to you. You can call 202, right? If it is another family member and you're just feeling, really stretched, you don't really know what to do, you can call 203. These are two separate hotlines. One is the line that will take you to the services that the Women's Support Center offers, 202, and the 203 takes you to the helpline that services for mental health and psychosocial support. So, like for instance, people who are depressed, who are feeling that they need somebody to talk to, can just call that hotline. These two services are there. If you are in an active situation, you recognize that, look, I didn't realize that the police would act when I call, or you could call 999, right, and get the assistance in the moment that you need. You can also reach out to somebody that is, within the setting where you are. Like, for instance, if you are unable to, call 202 at this time and you have access to other support services, whether it be through your agency in the community, through your school, the health center, etc., you're going to be connected to the people that you need to be connected to. And it doesn't mean that you have to act now. It doesn't mean that you have to act in a particular way. It's okay. Just in your own time and how you want, um, at the time that you want it. And I'm also speaking to the perpetrators, persons who,
Yeah.
because the reality is that, like I indicated to you a little early on, people are the ones who fall victim to, and people are the ones who perpetrate. So you may have been in a situation where, in your own environment at home, in your family of origin, you saw your mother being hit often by your father, and the excuse was to control, or not necessarily to control, but so that the person is in line, or it's not necessarily that they're using physical violence, but you realize that you are um, ensuring that your wife, girlfriend, boyfriend does not leave the home when you leave the house, whatever. And you realize, but you know what? I didn't realize that that was controlling behavior and that was a form of domestic violence. I need help. If you feel that you are in that kind of situation, don't remain in silence. You're not the only person who's going through that. You can reach out. I'm very mindful of the fact that CRB is a preventative arm of the police.
Yes.
Before you are in trouble with the law, you can go to CRB, I'm certain. Isn't that so, Mr.
So
Sergeant?
so true, so true. I have had I remember this gentleman so clearly about maybe it was about a month or two ago, who came to the office along with his living girlfriend, and he said he gets angry, and he has never hit her, but he feels he's reaching to that point. And then I had to, after having a discussion with him, let him know what the law says, etc. I also referred him to another partner agency. And it was nice to see that he reached out to me some time ago. He called me and he told me that he took some of the steps, advice that we, the CRB, gave him, and also that of Human Services, so that when he feels like he's getting angry, he does a certain thing, he goes away, he cools out, and then he comes back, and then they have a discussion. So you are so correct, ma'am. We at the CRB, we try our best, and the other agencies, we try our best to prevent, as you could say, DV. Yes. So we're going to take another quick break, Collins. It's 10 past 10. It's an amazing interview. So stay tuned to Police Insight. When we come back, a few more questions. Stay tuned.
Sometimes you know where you want to go, but may not know how to get there. Your vision, your future, your life. Bank of St. Lucia provided me the advice that supported my goals at every stage of my life, my business, my retirement, and what I leave for those most important to me. We may not all have the same goals, but we all need to plan for them.
www.shopmassystoresSLU.com. It's Massy Stores online supermarket where you shop and pay for your groceries online. Try it today and save $10 off delivery until September 30th. It's simple and convenient. Choose delivery to your doorstep with quick delivery or collect curbside, which is absolutely free. Massy Stores online supermarket. Shop now.
To protect appliances from lightning, rain, and floodwater damage, unplug them, then turn off the main switch. Lightning can produce electrical surges which can damage equipment. Protect your electronics from water damage as well. Make sure you have flashlights, battery-powered radios, and extra fresh batteries available. Be smart, stay safe.
Vision Express Castries has moved to a bigger, better location with more services. Our new Vision Express location is on the corner of Bridge Street and Mikud Street. So come join us at our new location on Bridge Street. Best staff, best service, great vision. Vision Express. Call 457-7400 or visit us on Facebook.
Welcome back to Police Insight. Your host there, Sergeant Zachary Hippolyte. In studio with me, our director at Gender Affairs or Gender Relations, or however you remember it, Miss Janey Joseph. Um, whilst we're at the break there, Madam Director, I received some information, some accusation that's been made in reference to the police and mediation. Last time I checked, the mediation is actually a tool or creature of the court. If I'm correct, mediation, when a matter is in the court, and the court may order mediation to see if the parties would come to some form of agreement or settlement without actually going through a full trial. But someone told me that someone of prominence is making some accusations that police officers are demanding mediation from victims, some victims of domestic violence, etc. I don't know how the investigator can do that. Have you ever heard of such reports, ma'am, ever reaching your desk from victims where police officers may be trying to influence victims, whether it's mediation or otherwise, of not going to court?
I don't have any such reports before me, but I'll say this. We need to understand that if a victim has come to the police and indicated that they are, a victim of domestic violence, um, the idea of, mediation being a first option is scary.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
This is, like you rightly said, something that the court would perhaps order under specific circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We need to understand the nature of domestic violence. Remember when we looked at all of what we said that domestic violence entails, and the idea of a controlling behavior. And so it means it suggests that there is a difference in power. The power relations are strained, right? In a situation where you have an abuser and a victim, when you put these people together and you have people speaking uh, through them to them and
Mm-hmm.
trying to find some way of arriving at a common understanding without an intervention that is specific to the person who has more power in the relationship. Unless you level that playing field, then you can't exactly speak of negotiation, because it means that there will always
True.
be some form of manipulation. So, especially if you do not have any level of training in that particular area of work, you should ensure that you stay clear of making such a recommendation, especially when a report has actually been made to you. Because it sometimes takes a lot before somebody who is a victim of domestic violence comes out and indicates that, look, I am a victim and I need help. When somebody comes to you and they make a report, they're saying, I need help, right? And when you do that, you kind of you're bringing the person um, back to the situation in a way that takes away even more of the control that they had in the situation, because they exercised a bit of self control. They exercise control over the situation by coming to you. That is a big decision that they're taking, right? They're coming to you. When you make a recommendation of that nature, you are removing that level of control that they had, right? You are now acting in a way that tells them, okay, this is what you need to do, right? And then placing them in a situation where they are disadvantaged, because that same individual who has
Yes.
control over them is placed at the same level with them, with a carte blanche opportunity now to be able to exercise all the manipulative powers that he already
True.
has over that individual. So it's a very dangerous way to go, and it is not the type of thing that you want to you want to encourage. However, as I indicated to you, I don't know that I'm not aware. But if in fact it is being said that this is happening, then we need to be very careful about that. And just generally, when you're dealing with persons who are victims of gender-based violence of any type,
Right,
including
right,
domestic violence,
right,
you need
right.
to try as much as possible not to impose upon them ways of dealing with their issues that would take away the control, a little bit of control that they already developed by actually coming to you to report.
Right, and I just want to say generally, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's any other form of report, um, the police, should not be in the business of entertaining wajma. We have that term called wajma, or trying to influence a victim from going to court or not going to court. Our job is to get the evidence, get the information, give the victim, and especially when it comes to domestic violence, give the victim the necessary knowledge and information they need, certain steps that they need to take. In general matters, if the victim wants a warning, you do your warning. If you have to take the individual to court, you take them to court. But the police should not be in the business, if it is happening, or if there are reports coming in wherever of police officers coercing people or telling victims, "Oh, don't worry about that. That man, don't worry about that. Don't worry about taking that man to court." That is not our place. That is what we're not supposed to do, and it should not be tolerated. I just wanted to make that point. Madam Director, when it comes to the penalty, according to the Act, what penalties can one face if found guilty in a court of law of domestic violence?
Okay, so this act gives on summary conviction, a person who is convicted of domestic violence can face up to 10 years, $10,000 fine, up to 5 years imprisonment, or both, right?
Okay.
But we must take a closer look at that, because you see, because of the broad list of acts
Mm-hmm,
that fall
mm-hmm,
within the context of domestic violence, you may find that an individual who is a victim of physical violence may suffer, um, say, for instance, an assault that is serious, as grievous harm. They've probably somebody's broken their arm or
mm-hmm,
something of that
mm-hmm.
nature. And there are provisions in the
In the criminal
criminal
code,
code,
yes.
right, that can cover these areas. So the Domestic Violence Act is very clear on that. In addition to you making the report for domestic violence, the police officer can charge under whichever of the instruments that they think they need to. So I'm imagining if somebody suffers some kind of grievous harm, you would not charge the person only with domestic violence, that you would go in the criminal code and identify the appropriate section and use that to charge the individual, right? That's just one example, right? But but then if the charge is under the umbrella of domestic violence, then it carries that penalty, that cap.
Excellent. And what if, Madam Director, what if an individual, because we're dealing with human beings, goes to the police or another agency, maliciously makes or deliberately makes a false report that has to do with domestic violence? Does the Act take this into consideration? And if so, what does it say about it?
Okay. So because of the nature of domestic violence, sometimes people could make a report, and later on they change their stories and indicate that that never happened, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it really did happen,
Mm-hmm.
but because of intimidation, they have changed their stories, right? And that is all part of the whole intimidation and coercion that can be happening behind closed doors. But we could also have situations where people maliciously would accuse somebody else of something. And that happens in every area. And the act does speak to that. Um, that, you know, however, in situations of that nature, and you might be able to get the actual section from the act since you have the electronic copy before you,
Okay, I'll look for
Sergeant.
it. I'll
Where
look
you
for
can
it
read
before the show ends.
specifically
Yes, yes.
right
Hmm.
what it says where that is
Hmm.
concerned.
Hmm.
But then, since you mentioned that, I also wanted to point to um, another area where reporting is absolutely important. So, in as much as an individual who is themselves a victim of any form of domestic violence can go ahead and report the matter now or at another point in time,
Hmm.
if certain classes of people working with children and they even as much as suspect that the child is a victim of a form of abuse, then that person is mandated by policy and now law within
Hmm.
the Domestic Violence Act to make such a report, right? And the act covers the individual. So if you make a report as a, say, for instance, a counselor, or a social worker, or a teacher,
Hmm.
and it turns out that situation isn't so, you're covered under the act because you didn't do it in any kind of malicious intent. You did it because you had reasonable suspicion. There was reasonable information, that you may have had in your possession to suggest that that child may have been in danger of, suspected that there was some kind of violence perpetrated against that individual. So so even when you are acting in the best interest of the child and an error is made, you are not actually faulted for it. But if maliciously you choose to make a report so as to defame another individual and so on, of course, the act deals with that, and there is um, there's treatment of that particular behavior within the letter of the law.
Excellent.
I must say that a lot of people are interested in that, and I am also very interested in the fact that people are interested in that, because the question in would be, is there a um, is this a cop out?
Hmm.
Is this a, oh, and I can, if I can show that in addition to you dropping the case that you really lied,
Hmm. Hmm.
then I can actually prove my innocence even better. So now you are in trouble, and it makes you um, you know in a worse off state. So you so it's interesting that there is interest in that particular area, and it is something that of course we will monitor, because remember that the reason why we have laws of that nature would be to ultimately protect the victim, right? We want to send a very strong
True.
message that intimidation, especially in the context of domestic relationships, would be tolerated.
That's right.
Yeah?
Okay, ma'am. Imagine we left with just about a minute and a half. Imagine that, and there's still other stuff that we didn't get a chance to touch on. So, ma'am, now that we're winding down, some advice, probably to men themselves, probably to men, activists, neighbors. Let's close it down with some advice, ma'am, and then we will end.
Okay. And like I've said throughout the interview, domestic violence is a problem that can affect anybody. If you realize that you are a victim of domestic violence, there is help and there is hope. You can call 202. If you are a victim of intimate partner violence, you can call 203. If you realize that you need support because you are in an extremely difficult situation, you can call 999 or visit the nearest police station if you are a victim of any form of domestic violence. You can reach out to the agencies in your community, civil society organizations as well, for support, for information on domestic violence. You can always reach out to the Department of Gender Affairs at 468-5197, or you can of course, visit your schools, health centers, etc., and speak to somebody. So you're not alone, and help is there. If you are a person who recognizes after you've listened to this program or because you've read information that some of the behaviors that you engage in your domestic relationships can constitute domestic abuse, then you can also get help if you wish to control those behaviors. You can get assistance. You can visit the crisis center. Again, you can reach out to the CRB, the Community Relations Branch of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. Um, if you are an activist, you are a leader in a community, you run a club or any of those non-governmental organizations and you want information, you can always access information online. You can also access information through the offices of the Department of Gender Affairs, through the Crisis Center, the Family Court, the Department of Human Services, through schools as well. Sometimes information is there. You could use the resources that are in those agencies as well in terms of the human resources to do workshops, sessions in your departments or agencies. Spread the word. When we will publish, when the layperson's guide will be available, we will be sharing with agencies that work with people in the communities. Make sure that you get your copy and that you can share with the other people from the community so that they can know how to help themselves in situations where they are victims or perpetrators themselves.
Thank you so much, Director Janey Joseph of Gender Affairs Department. Thank you so much, ma'am, and do have a good night.
Thank you, and have a good night yourself.
Okay. All right, folks. So we're wrapping up, and this has been another episode of Police Insight. Don't forget those numbers you could call from a landline or your mobile phone. 202, that is the Women's Support Hotline, 202, or 203 if you want some mental health support, feeling suicidal, feeling depressed. You could call 203 from a landline or your mobile phone at any time of the day or even night. This has been another episode of Police Insight with your host, Sergeant Zachary Hippolyte. Thank you, Choice Television, once again for hosting this informative program. Good night, everyone. Until next Thursday, stay safe.